Hey, welcome to Agile Adventures. Yes, post fast of the ninth of Av edition. Yes. How you doing, Brian?
I am doing very well. Refreshed, awake, energetic.
Yes, the temple in Jerusalem is still burning, but we're all good, right?
Hey, I didn't even know it was still burning.
Well, I mean, historically, it's still it burnt from the ninth of Av in until like the midday on the 10th of Av.
Ah, okay.
So like I guess it's nowadays the burning is not physical; it's just spiritually burning. But back then it was yeah the last ember went out on the midday the tenth of Av.
Gotcha.
We were sitting
Gotcha.
there watching it. Apparently, it was a big deal. I think it's here. It seems like people realize the historicity of like the temple in Jerusalem being destroyed.
Well, I guess the all the excitement this summer kind of got dredged up all the memories.
Yeah, yeah. Historically, Jews are not big fans of the summer because like the Crusades also in the summer. Like no one wants to go crusading when it's cold outside.
I always get amazed that 'cause I go to India probably about 3 times a year, and I'm amazed at how many Israeli tourists are in India.
Yeah, they're idiots.
It seems to be a top destination spot.
It's like a thing to do after you go to the army to like go to like stupid places and pretend to, whatever. I mean, India is a wonderful place to visit. It's not a stupid place. I just like don't have like a lot of respect for like 20-year-olds who like want to spend their money like living like tourists in India. Like, I have all nothing but respect for Indian culture and for visiting India when you're older, as long as you get your shots, and that's
But
although my
the
my
shot thing is a really
grandfather.
big issue now.
So one of my grandfathers, not my father's father, because but my mother's father, he was a civil engineer, and he worked for a German steel company, and yeah, he was in like over 120 different countries.
Oh wow.
So he said that he saw in India, like when he was there, like just the difference between like I mean, hopefully things are much better now. But he said the difference between like the wealthy people who like live like like if you live like on like a you could live like a king on like a minimum wage there,
Oh
on
yeah.
like American minimum wage there. But he said like the poor people, like he said he saw somebody like um cutting off his own leg to beg better, like because he thought it would be easier for him to he'd get more of a profit begging if he like was
Wow.
missing a leg. Like that level of
That's sad.
desperation is like not something that we're used to around here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's
hopefully they
that's
don't.
pretty
Hopefully
sad.
it's better now. I like to imagine that India now is like nothing like it was back in the 70s and 80s when he was doing stuff for German steel.
Eh, you know, I think every place has its good parts and bad parts. The there's still people starving in the U.S. and I'm in Silicon Valley.
Not really.
I'm telling you, I
I mean,
pass
like,
by homeless encampments every day. I'm in
yeah,
one of the
but
I'm in one of the richest parts of all of the United States.
yeah, but they're not starving. Like, like if they are this because they're not availing themselves of available resources. I mean, listen, you could argue that if they would avail themselves of you that availing yourself of resources is like, yeah, getting a job because that's an available resource. But
That's right.
like that's not the case in India. or wasn't the case, at least at the time. Like it seems like the best these people could hope for was to be more effective at begging by also being a cripple.
I think a lot of things have changed. The last time I was actually trying to hire someone from India, I looked at the prices there and looked at the prices I get in the US. And I said, hey, you know what? It'll be cheaper for me to hire someone from the Midwest in the United States than someone in India. That's how much the standard of
because they're all
living is
working for below living wage from Apple companies in India. Like
exactly.
I mean, like yeah, it's not that. I mean, like I've seen the average wage of a developer in India. It's not the same as a average wage to develop in the Midwest. Like whether or not, yeah, the availability may be something else, but like, yeah. Okay, anyways. So yeah, now that we've knocked, the second to largest populous country in the whole world, uh, let's talk about testing.
Yeah, testing is one of my favorite subjects because I think I was talking to you about this earlier. I feel like, every 5 years we double the number of developers in the world, because there's that many people getting into software development. But we haven't paid the same amount of attention towards testers. And I think what's happening now is as we double the number of developers without expanding the number of testers, the quality of code is decreasing around the world.
Okay, how do you like this syllogism? All developers are testers.
I think that all the developers should test, but I think that when we talk about that mantle of the nomenclature of a tester, it denotes someone who's really skilled in it. And I would venture to say that most developers are not skilled in testing. They try, but they're not skilled.
I feel like we could go run in circles here about the no true Scotsman type thing, but right. True. Those developers are not developers.
Yeah, I think that's true too. It's a tough spot. I think that I know when I was going through early in my career in software development, there was a definite emphasis on skill sets such as test design and test case development. And literally we would lay out whole testing matrices of here's all the scenarios, here's all the things that could happen. Let me boil these things down and look at the things that are similar, so you could develop tinier scripts that could get reused into suites.
So you're talking about test design, which is a level higher than testing, right?
I think it's a big part of it, right?
So like, okay, so like there's the unit tests, right? Which are like, when you have a feature, you make tests to determine before writing code to determine that your feature satisfies the requirements of the spec you've been given, right?
Right.
So that I think most developers can or should know how to do that, right?
What I find is that I think that most new developers don't learn with test-driven development techniques in mind. And then I'm finding a lot of people don't believe in it.
Believe in it.
Yeah.
Define believe in it. Like, I mean, there's not much to believe in. Like, we know that it exists, right?
Well, I think that a lot of developers believe that they know what they're doing, they have enough experience, and adding those extra unit tests doesn't really help. It's a waste of time. And they can just code it directly, and so they'll skip doing unit tests.
Mm-hmm.
So every place I've gone,
Well, they're
it's a
not.
rarity to
Are,
find,
are you
80%
claiming they're
test coverage.
wrong?
I think they are. I think
You have
that
the nerve to stand against most developers.
absolutely.
Yes. I mean,
and
yeah.
and it's not hubris on my part. It's really looking at other professions. So, again, my wife's a doctor. You go to the emergency room, they get your stats, they figure out, well, here's what normal should look like for a person with your demographics. And then they run tests and they see how close you are to the standard. And then they prioritize, kind of triage. Here's the thing that's most likely to kill you if it's off. So let me treat this and run a test again until you're within the standard. Then it moves to the next thing. So it's methodical. And they've been doing this for, centuries,
Yeah,
right?
because I
You
mean,
know.
like, it's yeah, but that's because someone will die. That's like different,
you go to accounting, right?
Okay, well, what's it called? Like, similar engineering fields, like civil engineering, right? So
mm-hmm.
like, yeah, they do a lot of tests. They do stress tests and they do tests like that. But they don't like make a test right, before they make the bridge, and then keep destroying the bridge until the test passed, right?
But that's only because that's an expensive way to build a bridge. But they do design the tests and they build the mechanisms they need to test at the same time they're building the bridge so that they can test it and make sure everything is okay. So it's always with test in mind, and they're always really concentrating on test design.
Mhm. Okay, I'm not really good at playing devil's advocate for like not having tests.
It's a hard thing to argue against, right?
Like, I don't know, like I'm saying, like it's been like at least 4 years since I've switched to the oh yeah, like spaghetti code is great. Why test?
Yeah, I
Just
think
keep
it's a
hacking it until it works. What's wrong with that?
well. I think that there's a when you're especially when you're new to the game, there's a different mentality. When you're new to the game, a lot of people think that the priority is on new product development. It's developing the code to make things run the first time. But if once you've been in it for a while and you've seen the statistics, you start realizing that 40% of the costs are for new development, but 60% of the cost of software is maintenance. It's like what you really want to do is optimize for maintenance, because you can decrease those costs. Now that's the biggest bang for your buck. And
Okay,
that's
so
a whole different mentality, right?
uh-huh. Let me tell you my perspective on this, because I may have a
Mm-hmm.
slightly different perspective. I like started with like WordPress, and there's really no way to test WordPress to my knowledge, like no good way to test WordPress. Like you could whatever. And then I sort of got into the bat making themes and doing stuff. And then I got a job working for a CRM company that its main thing was like PHP development, right?
Right.
And it dawned on me that I had done a lot of BS to actually land this job, because whatever, that's what you do in the beginning, right?
Right.
But then it dawned on me that anybody who would buy a product with me writing the code is an idiot.
That's kind of harsh
And I was like,
on yourself.
I was like, how do I know that what I'm writing doesn't suck?
Right.
And that was my impetus to actually figure out okay, write a test. I did some research and well, okay, but everybody's code sucks. And it turns out that like the more you like, the main thing that helped me overcome this was seeing how much everyone else sucked. But one of the things that helped me overcome it was like, oh, like actually write a test. And then you know that your code kind of works, like at least in a very defined situation, you know that the code works. And when you like have to like, and then when something stops working, you have to like, screw around here and screw around there and like, edit things stupidly to get it to like hack it to work. Cause like, I know that it worked 2 minutes ago, but like then I fixed something and now it doesn't work. So it was like, yeah, you knew that you weren't breaking it.
Right.
That was my entire perspective and then later I got a more I guess I would like to imagine a more mature perspective. But that was like that was the main thing that sold me in the first place, was just the knowledge that like it's likely, well, I mean, like you say hard on yourself, but like it's just being honest, right? Like if you taught yourself how to code, right? Or like, and even if you like had it, you were taught how to code, right? And you are now being like, charged with actually building things that will work more than like, oh, like I could follow it in a tutorial and oh yeah, and I could even like slightly abstract that to another use case. You need to test, like otherwise you're just guessing.
Right. Very true. Yeah, I arrived at the same place you did, but through a different route. It was I always had the Scrum Master type role, and the Scrum Master type roles I've had even before we were formally using Scrum. I would grab all the stories, all the work that people couldn't figure out, and usually they had some code written, but not completely, and I had to deal with the mess. And that's when I discovered, you know what? They could have fixed this if they would have just tested pieces of it as they were going through. They would have realized that they had this error. Why didn't they figure this out? Right? Why didn't they figure this out? So it was really me picking up other people's work that did it for me.
Yeah. So some people claim that you could do this with a debugger. Why can't you do it with a debugger? Just with print state with just print statements or console logs or echoes.
Right. So debuggers are designed to focus on things that we know, like the syntax, but they don't actually pick up the intent of the functionality of the features you're writing. So you could have a debugger and it'll pick up little stuff, but if the code was actually designed to print the number 4, the debugger isn't going to know that you made a mistake and printed the number 5. Right.
Yeah, but I say so. What I see sometimes is that instead of a debug, like, well, no, but if you like put a breakpoint and like you look at the variable and you see, oh, there's like instead of 4, there's a string that says, gorgonzola cheese. Like that's not going to work.
Right.
Then you could start. That's or like people who put like print statements all over the place or console logs, just log the whole thing up, and then they figure out what went wrong.
And I think those are wonderful techniques that should be used while you're coding. But let's keep in mind, when we talk about testing, one thing you want to do, especially when we talk about automated testing, we want to think about the repeatability of things. And so I want to actually develop this test in a way that I can do over and over again with the same code, even after I make changes to it. And it's easy to repeat. And so when you're using the consoles and debuggers, it requires that human intervention that keeps you involved. And it's more efficiently done if you can remove the the actual developer from the process
Cool.
as much as possible, right?
Okay. I'm gonna
So
try to
again,
change
repeatability.
I'm gonna try to change the speakers. See if you get like a major here, start hearing yourself or something. Okay, try now.
All right, is that my voice better now?
So your voice was good before. It's just a matter of like these things. I forgot to charge them.
Aha, okay. No worries. But yeah, I think one of the major things we want to focus on, and especially in terms of automated testing, is that repeatability factor, right? I'm going to be able to run this thing over and over again, especially if I'm using an agile method where you're actually doing things in iterations. You need to keep running that test over and over again. So you want something that, as much as possible, does not require human intervention as after it's been created.
Uh-huh.
And another thing we want to look at too is, which is contrary to popular belief, when something is complicated, so it's subject to human error, that's like more of an impetus to actually automate the tests. So that way you take the human out of it and just have the objective opinion of the machine, making sure that it's correct.
Uh-huh. So yeah. So that I mean, listen, yeah. I feel this would be better if I didn't agree with you. Uh-huh. So let's talk about something we may not agree on, because then that will be
All
more
right.
interesting. So you had made the statement that you think it's a myth that front end testing is harder than back end testing.
Yes.
And I'm a, just sign me up for the cult of front end being easier than back end. That in my horoscope, I'm a deep believer in the myth that front end is not, I mean, maybe not intrinsically, but given the tools and the fact that like nowadays most people use like front end frameworks that like make fake DOMs and stuff,
Yeah.
much harder to test.
Well, so I think that one of the challenges in developing front end tests, it is in finding and identifying the actual elements that you're going to test. But I think that part of that problem isn't a testing problem. That's a development issue. Because if you know that you need to identify a lot of these objects so you can test it, you should develop the code in the way that you have static IDs for those objects, right? And then it's easier to test.
Yeah, but so much of it is like so much. Okay, so first of all, so we're not talking about um okay, so okay, let's yeah, I guess I see we have to narrow this down a bit. Uh like so first of all, styles, yeah, you could check for class names, you could check for whatever, but it could be that at some point it's gonna be, like you're gonna let me back up. One thing about
Mhm.
front work development is that there are so many frameworks, right?
Yes.
So you don't want to retest that you don't want to test that the framework is going to do what the framework claims is going to do, right?
Correct.
But that line is not it's not as black and white as like, oh, it will return a JSON object. It will add this to the database, right?
Yeah. And I see where you're going. Actually, that kind of reiterates the point I made a second ago, because the people that make the frameworks, they're not making it always in a way that makes it easier to test. And I think that they ought to, but and given that they
Okay,
haven't,
come on. That's like okay, yeah, okay, agreed. So you're saying you're saying it's so okay. So we're in that's what I that was what I that was the beginning. I said, yeah, we can argue about whether it's intrinsically harder to test, but practically like the ecosystem and the fact that anything you're doing is being rendered in a browser, and there's and then there's a level of DOM traversal you're going to need, and the fact that you're going to be using these frameworks and everything else, like practically, yeah, it's going to be much harder.
well, is it harder than back? Because backend frameworks, a lot of times they have the same problems, right?
But they usually it could be that like it's a chicken and egg type thing. Like it could be that you're right in that it's like because backend frameworks know that their clientele will not be interested in the framework that you can't test, and they don't go for it, right? Like no one's going to be like, oh, I'm going to make this backend in PHP where I can't test it. Like obviously anyone who uses PHP is going to choose to like add PHP unit to their repository and test with that. No one would ever like use a framework like WordPress where it's almost impossible to test.
Well, you can always test the output on the front end, right?
Yeah.
Is it rendering this, right?
Yeah, but that's not, you can't test the saying testing WordPress. Well, it could be because it's like WordPress does everything. So you're literally offloading everything to the framework. And so other than
Right.
some level of, so yeah, so you could like customize it, but it's really like not like but like yeah, like, and if you're using a plugin, forget about it. The people who make plugins, they don't like, testing is like so far off the radar because the average person who's using their plugin like wants to be an idiot. It wants to just like plug it, like, oh, it's a plugin, I plug it in, that's what I do.
Well, so I think what we're talking about here now is we're lots of times in the front end, because the people that do it are not as concerned about testing, they're choosing options that are not as easily testable. But they could choose other options if they want that are easier to test, right?
Yeah, like they could like you could like write your whole, you could use vanilla JavaScript, that's easy to test
That's right.
if only
It's
people did
made
it.
for it.
Yeah, well, I'm just
But
saying, like I've yet to meet anyone who's made it who's like, I'm going to use for my like enterprise site vanilla JavaScript. It's a great framework. It's called vanilla. It's never happened. Like I don't know, it doesn't happen.
but again, I think that it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy in that because a lot of people in the front end are not as concerned about testing, again, they're making choices to choose things that are not as testable. But on the back end, because that's a lot of the back end stuff is considered more essential to the workings and the operations of the software, people care more about testing, so they're choosing options that are more easily testable. So it's not just that back end is harder to test, or front end is easier to test, or front end is harder. It's the choices that the people are using when they actually implement the software itself, when they implement the architecture. And again, I think they should make different choices. Right.
So
Right now,
like I say,
you know,
remember when like React, like I don't know anybody who unit tests React regularly. what I do when except when when I'm given the wiggle room for React is I like go like halfway where I put as little as I want into as possible into the React component,
Mm-hmm.
and then I do unit tests for all the other things. But like testing like the async, like a hook in React is a royal pain in the neck. You could do it, but there's like if you're using like let's say like if you're using like any sort of and then also like the environment of the front end npm, right? It's the Wild West,
Well,
right? Like
so
it's
I look at it this way. I go to the fundamental purpose of testing. Fundamentally, the purpose of testing is to provide assurance that what you wrote, what you coded, works as it was intended. It fulfills its purpose. And I think that when we do test design, and that's why I'm so big on test design, we ought to look at what is the probability that certain things will not work as intended? What's the risk? And we should spend more time testing the things that are more likely to not work than the things that are more likely to work. So we should be choosy about what we test. We shouldn't just test everything.
yeah.
And there's that, I don't know if you heard that old joke about the police officer and the old man at night. And the police officer sees the old man. He's looking at around the lamppost, and he's like, "Hey, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Old man, what are you doing?" And the old man says, "I lost my wallet." And the police officer says, "Well, where'd you lose it?" And the old man says, "Well, over there in that dark alley," right? And the police officer says, "Well, why are you looking by the lamppost?" And the old man says, "Well, the light's better over here," right? And I think that what we've done for years in testing is we have chosen to test things that weren't as likely to have errors instead of actually saying, hey, let's take a risk-based approach to our testing. Let's test the things that are more likely to have errors. And if I can figure this stuff out up front, and if I know this, that should help determine what implementation tools I use, what languages I pick, right? What frameworks I'm going to choose. Because I can know some of this stuff. Some of this stuff is foreseeable. I can know up front. And I don't think we've done a good job of
a
that.
good option, like except for vanilla JavaScript.
I think that so take our project with the in React, right?
Yeah.
The things that are most likely to break or have errors, they've been calculations.
Yeah. So I'm of the opinion, even though we didn't implement this, that we should, and this is what I started doing, but then whatever. We're not getting into too much specifics, but like you have a test that says I get something in this format, which is the proper format,
Right.
and I get back this data structure, and it's passed into and then that way that if you change one of the functions that changes the structure, you'll get a little red thing when you run the test.
Right. Yes. And I agree. That is a plausible method that we probably should be using. And that makes a lot of sense. We've chosen not to do it.
Well,
right. And I think that's part of the problem.
It was we're going to test it all in E2E testing anyways. So blah, blah, blah.
Exactly. And I think that again, this goes back to my hypothesis that because we're not taking a risk-based approach on what's most likely to not work, we're making choices that ends up making it harder for us to do testing. But it's not that it's the front end is harder to test. We just made some wrong choices.
Yeah, but in the back end, it's like, you use PyTest. That's it, you know. Right. I mean, honestly, like we didn't do a great job there because there hasn't been consistency and whatever. There's also problems in the back end, but like the choice to like to make really slow, like the thing about the EDE tests, which I think is like again, like it's not this. It's not like the first time I'm saying is on this podcast. So but the thing about the EDE test is that you don't do them until you're trying to release. Whereas the way the Jest works, you just keep it running, right? It just runs in the background, and then if anything breaks, a red thing comes up.
Well, so here's the thing. Even that is a choice, right? So I've built CI/CD systems that every time you wanted to contribute code, you had to rerun the test, the end-to-end test.
Yes, no, we do that, but it slows things. No, I agree. That's sort of what we do. Every time you want to contribute code, you have to run the test. Do it. Does everyone do it? I don't know. Probably not. But that's the rule.
I was about to call you on run some statistics.
I'm saying like that's the rule is you have to do it. And like and also when it and like it's pretty easy to know if you're lying because in the release it will. Although to be fair, the tests are a little flaky. That's another issue with the EDE tests. So whatever, like I've had times where I've run them and I've gotten a full everything's green, and then I then I pushed, and then there's like 5 or so red tests. But like just because the tests are flaky, sorry, like I mean, EDE tests can be flaky by nature. Like that's why unit tests are so nice. The likelihood of flake is much like the risk of flake is much lower because you're not testing that the whole system works.
And the fact that they're incrementally faster.
Oh, well, that's the main benefit. Like that's like yeah.
But yeah, I'm gonna argue that again, going back to the choice of what to test, I think that for the back end, because patterns of testing have existed for so long on the back end, we're more likely to agree on what needs to be tested in the back end. But on the front end, I think that we're less mature at actually working with the front end. People don't understand the user experience element.
This argument is like is not going to work. You know why? Because eventually, like the grains of sand make a hill, right? Like it's like, well, the only reason why it's harder to test on the front end is because there are less clear defined patterns, and because of the fact that people in the front end don't test so much, the tools aren't as good. And like whatever. Eventually, when you add them all together, right, it's going to be that it's hard to test.
But I still hear you. Those weren't going to be my reasons that it's harder. I don't think it's harder. I think that we choose to test things on the front end that don't necessarily need to be tested as much, and they happen not to lend themselves to be easy to test. Whereas the stuff that we choose to test on the back end are things that are much more necessary, and they lend themselves to testing. We figured out how to do it, and we just do it. I think that, yeah, I think it all boils down to choices. I think that, no, and that's why I mentioned the probability piece of it. The probability that something would break. You should test that more than other stuff, right? I think that things that are repeatable should be tested more. I think that things that are more complex, where they're subject to human error, they should be tested more with automated tests. I think that the rules that we use on the back end for figuring out which automated test to make, for some reason, I know the reason, but we throw them away. We throw those reasons away and that logic away when we're testing the front end. And you pay the consequences for it. Like, I do want to test more of the things that are going to stay the same. On the front end, I don't think that we even try to identify the things that are going to stay the same the most, right? Like, for our system, we're doing a lot of reports, so it has a certain amount of data. The data that you need to analyze is going to be the same no matter the UI and the look and the arrangement. But we don't do as much data testing, even though
we literally took out tests that I wrote because yeah, we're not running it, and then it got into like weird, like we didn't want to bother maintaining it.
Yeah, I again, these are choices, and that choice on the back end we would have considered ludicrous, but for some reason on the front end we think it's okay, and so we do these illogical things.
Who's we?
I was using the royal we for the team.
It's like, I don't think it's okay. Like, don't put me in. Don't get me.
But I yell about this stuff all the time, right? But paint a thorn in everyone's side about it.
Yeah.
But but again, I think it's a choice thing, right? I think that the when you think about what could go wrong, most of the time, the look and feel, like what colors we're using and basic functionality, I think most of the time we get that stuff right.
Don't bother testing it.
Well, it's one of those things where like we get it right because we look at it and we want it to look a certain way and everything. So but once you get it right, it's gonna be right forever.
So like there is something called like there's just a little bit of Dunning-Kruger going on here.
Like, I gotta agree.
Of like people think, oh, front end. That's like what you look at. That's what front end means. Everybody knows that.
No, I have to agree. I think that I have to agree that we set certain expectations about the way the front end is going to work, and because of that, well, not only about the way it's going to work, but the way the front end is going to change, and because of that, we make decisions on not testing certain things that are easy for us to test. And if it is going to change, it'll be just as easy to hurry up and change the test.
Yeah. But yeah, like I think like people thought that like it just means like what you look at, right? Like that's like
right.
That's what people thought when you say like testing the front end, like, and you just think, okay, well, but how do I test the front end? Because it's very subjective. I need to look at it and decide that it looks nice. And,
Yeah. So, and here's the thing: out of the whole user experience, the look and feel is probably the least important aspect of UX. Right? what I care about most, if I have a workflow and how I'm doing things, that workflow shouldn't change that much. And I should test that. I as far as the like calculations and returning the right thing,
I
the
don't know. I mean,
calculation is going to be the same, right?
we have a guy who's like officially heads up the dev team, who I had to explain to him what a callback was on Thursday.
Yeah.
I gave him a lesson about like what a callback means, and
Well,
so like I don't know, like I think like meaning people call themselves front end developers when they don't know what a callback means. I mean that already is a bit of a stretch, right? Like
that kind of proves my point, right? If you don't understand this stuff, then you're not going to look for it, right?
yeah,
And it's one of those things where like just about every functional program that you could possibly do fundamentally is going to pass in some information to a function to do some kind of manipulate it and then get something back in return.
so yeah, it's just meaning because like the people who like people there's a certain like anybody can make a static website, right? Like it's like
Right.
everybody and their uncle can, like especially with like and like everyone could like sort of get like, okay, you make a template, that much they can get, so a lot of people like feel that they are front end developers by virtue of the fact that they like they can read the docs on Matilda UI.
Right.
But then when it's like, oh, okay, well, like how am I actually going to implement this Matilda UI view? Like when it's like, oh, like I'm gonna need you to like, teach me how to actually sort the search results, right? And a view, like it's like, oh, like that's probably gonna take like 2 minutes, right? Like I could show you how to do it in static code, like just show you search results, not from a list. So
Right.
yeah, probably to like actually do that with a list is like that's like kind of the whole thing,
Well, and again, I think that the other thing that happens too, with regards to difficulty in testing the front end, is that I think that we look for frameworks for testing to make things easier. And some things that we need to test, like what you just mentioned, it may be easier to not use a framework to test it.
Well, there's no way to like okay, maybe I'm wrong, but like there's no like way to like test just the running node instance that you're serving your front end on without any sort of framework, like even if you're using the native node framework, testing framework.
Well, yeah, I can actually just send it to the screen.
Well, that's not automated like that. Like
I can program that in. And in fact, I've done this. I've done tested systems in QA. I've added in code fragments to send stuff to the screen, send stuff to a printer, send stuff to a file for a report. Only done that in testing, so I could verify stuff. And it's part of the code, so it actually works all the time.
well, how do you
get the
check
results
that
of
the
it?
thing that came out of the printer is good? Other than actually looking at the printout.
Well, again, I can actually have different tests that either read the file, that look on the screen, for the things that I inserted to test things out. And then I just comment those things out when I send it to the Prussian code because I know it works, right? I mean, so there are alternative ways that we could use to test things.
I feel like that's not scalable. Like for a whole application to like test things like that without a framework.
Well, so here's the deal, and I know I'm aging myself by saying this, but
There used to not be
for
frameworks. And it used to be 10 miles uphill in the snow.
listen to me, young man. when I was your age,
We didn't have frameworks.
I didn't have all these fans, right?
Yeah.
Because didn't have Selenium 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Right?
But you must have had Jest 30 years ago, right? Like before the invention of Node, you probably had Jest, right?
No. In fact, you're going to make me look it up.
PyCharm, right? You didn't have
I'm pretty
PyCharm?
sure Jets. It's like 15 years old.
Yeah. No, it's like made by Facebook. I mean, come on. It's not even that. Like, how old is Facebook? Well, okay, whatever. Facebook is more than 15 years old, I guess.
Probably about 15 years old, right?
Let's see. No,
That's the thing.
okay, like I don't know when it actually came out because like I was like not near one of the early adapters of Facebook. In fact, I don't have a Facebook account, so not an early
Neither
adapter.
do I.
Yeah. So like I don't know when it came out, but didn't I think I may have been like 20 or so. So yeah, like 27, like so I'm 20, I just turned 28, 27. Yeah, 27. I'm in that weird thing where you just changed your age, but then you sort of got used to the new number. So now but I'm pretty sure it's 27. So you have to like stop at like increment 1. Yeah, no, just 27. So yeah, so maybe if it came out when I was 20, then it's 17 years old.
Yeah. So again, it's just, the whole thing about testing is that you want assurance that something works. There are many ways to get assurance that something works. What we've done
But there's no better way than using a framework that will do the whole.
Sometimes I think we're over relying on it, right? You know what? If I really want to know whether or not there's milk in my refrigerator, yeah, I can go in there and look at the milk, look for it and see if there's milk in there. But there's other means of assurance. In my household, my daughter is basically the only one that drinks the milk. I can ask her, right? There's other ways to get that assurance. It doesn't have to be one way through a framework.
I would never trust the daughter. I always verify myself. It's like I ask my kids, did you do your homework? And they say no. And then if they say yes, I say, okay, show it to me.
But yeah, there's more than one way to actually do it. And I think that as we progress with our tools, once we get a cool new tool, we only look at the tool as a way to actually solve our problem, right? We only look at the tool for assurance.
I had 3 sisters. I was the only boy. I have 4 boys. My parents were of the impression that girls were much more honest than boys. Like their daughters wouldn't lie to them the way I would. But you just know that no, they just lie for different reasons.
Yeah. And they get better at covering it up.
like meaning like I'm gonna lie for reasons that are like really really see-through and hedonistic, like and your daughters are gonna lie to you for things that like you wouldn't have, like why would you lie about that? What the hell, man? Like so like like you should be more worried about your daughters and your like sons. Like, you're gonna ask me like, did you take the car out last night and like, go drinking with your buddies? And I'm gonna say no, and you're gonna know I'm lying. Okay, like great. Sherlock Holmes, good for you.
You saw the beer cans in the back seat.
Yes. And like my sisters are gonna lie about like weird stuff. That like, yeah, why would so just warning to you. I mean, I don't know if you have any sons. I have four sons and no daughters, but when I do have a daughter, I am prepared to suspect they're lying for any weird reason.
So we recognize our level of irresponsibility after the first child, so we stopped.
Yeah, I think it diminishes. I think your level of responsibility goes down the more kids you have.
I think you just care less.
No, because like if you deal with your first kid good, your other kids are going to copy them.
That sounds reasonable.
My 5-year-old like doesn't dream of doing half the things that my firstborn did. Because I don't have to look at him weird because his brother's gonna look at him like he fell from the moon. Like your first kid is like, that's the mold, and then the rest of them, like, it's like, yeah, if you're considering having more kids, you should just know it gets easier. Like it doesn't get harder, especially if your first one's a girl, because the girls have like a natural instinct to take care of the other ones. I wish my first one was a girl, but it didn't happen, But like guys who like have like a girl for their first kid, like they have 8 kids and they don't even know their names, like.
Well, I'll tell you what, you haven't convinced me that testing the back end is actually easier than the front end, but you have convinced me that I should consider more kids. So I'm gonna sign off. Go look for the wife.
Yeah.
And talk about kid number 2.
Yeah. It's like not like.
What a great. What do you think?
I'm listen. I think if I've done that, then if I've made made the likelihood of more Levies being in the world, I've done my good for today. I love you.
There you have it, folks. You heard it first here.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll wrap up, and we'll join us for another episode of our Agile adventures and next week.
It was a bit of an adventure this time. No, like it's sort of like we started in one place and we went on a little excursion, didn't we?
Adventures happen like that sometimes.
Yeah, that's the show. Okay, much success in your future Levies. Love you.
Hey, you got it, man.
Okay.